And as I waited for a cab to pass by, my husband walked up to me. He had followed me. He had come after me, even though I had showed him what I thought was my absolute ugliest possible side, my anger. And yet there he was, still wanting to connect with me. And it just disarmed me so much. And as I remember it, I just wept. The tears just melted and spilled down my face because I couldn't believe that another person would still love me. Welcome to How to Trust Yourself, the podcast for anyone who's done with the endless second guessing and ready to tune in to your inner guidance. I'm Anna Holtzman, and I get that feeling of trudging through life like you're wading through mud, trying to figure out which way to go. In my 20s, I spent more time asking what should I do with my life than writing about crushes or bad dates in my journal. I've tried on a lot of answers: architecture, publishing, editing reality TV for a decade, and finally landing on therapy and coaching, helping people like you connect with your purpose. But here's the thing I've learned through all those twists and turns. Trusting yourself is the key to moving forward, even when the path feels messy. So if you're ready to stop doubting yourself and start listening to your gut, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back, dear listener. Today, I want to talk about something that is inherently uncomfortable and therefore uncomfortable to talk about. And I think that's exactly why we need to be talking about it and exploring it together. And this topic is the messy middle. What is the messy middle? The messy middle is that part of anything, whether it is a creative project, a business that you are building or growing, a relationship you are embarking on, really anything where there's like an initial honeymoon period of excitement and, oh my gosh, this is the thing, I'm diving in head first. And then there's the after the honeymoon period. There's the messy middle when, that's when the real process of figuring things out happens, and it's messy. Hence, it's called the messy middle. It can feel really uncomfortable. It is not a straight line. It can feel like a plate of spaghetti all tangled up in knots. A lot of times you're throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what works. And why am I thinking about this? Because, I think this is just relevant to all of us at some stage in time. It's certainly relevant to the folks who come to me for coaching. And it's very relevant to me right now. I am in the messy middle. For those of you who have been following this podcast or who know me and have been following my story for a while, you might know that about a year ago, well, I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to publish this episode, so I'll say that I am recording it in November of 2025. And a year ago from the month that I'm recording this, I decided to make a significant pivot in my coaching business, in my coaching practice. I had been focusing on helping folks find greater ease with chronic symptoms and chronic pain. I had been doing that work for about 5 years. I had built up a roster of clients, a network of colleagues, a business model, courses, etc., all based around this topic of chronic pain and chronic symptom recovery or changing your relationship with symptoms. And I decided a year ago to pivot because it was something that was very impactful to me and totally life-changing for me and no longer the focus of my own passion. And I felt I had to go with where my passion was leading me, which was towards supporting people in a different stage of development, a growing, blossoming, and blooming stage of development in which folks are doing things like bringing their creative work out into the world for the first time or in a bigger way or in a new way, a more authentic way, um, launching a business or growing a business or evolving a business, much in the way that I'm in the middle of doing, to be more in alignment with where your passions are, with where you feel your natural given talents are. Um, and all sorts of other transformations that are about flowering, blossoming, opening up, and evolving into our next iteration. It's something that most of us go through in different ways at multiple points during our life. And anyway, so this was a significant pivot for me in my business. And like every journey I've ever been on, it started off with kind of, what I'll call a honeymoon period, this like rush of excitement, like, yes, this is it. Like when I met my husband, like he's the one. I have found my person. This is it. I'm diving in head first. I've got, green lights are saying go. And that's how I felt about the pivot, the new or expanded direction that I knew I needed to take in my business because it was just calling me forward. So there's that initial like rush of energy and excitement. And oftentimes we get a rush of exciting feedback during that initial period. Like, the folks who've been in your realm for a while are like, ooh, you're doing something new. Like, let me investigate. And there's just all this energy around that period of time. And that period of time is finite and it's meant to be. Again, just like in a relationship, when I met my husband, we had this honeymoon period of excitement and meeting each other and everything was new. And, there's this like bonding, very intense bonding that happens during that period. All these chemicals are coursing through you. It's a very necessary stage of, the birth of something new, really, whether it is a love relationship or a creative project or a business or anything else. That honeymoon period is a necessary stage to kind of plant the seed of what this new thing is and have it germinate so it can start to blossom and grow. But just like with the blossoming and growth of anything, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a child, a new life, whether it is a new business direction or something else, after that initial honeymoon bonding excitement period, there comes a much more amorphous, messy, nonlinear, like, whoa, what is this thing actually? How does it work? What is its form? It's taking form. It's in that like form taking place. And that is, it's not as easy a stage of things to describe to other people. The emotions one goes through during this period are not as consistent. It's more of like, there's ups and downs and all over the place. One finds areas of like conflict or quote unquote problems to work out during that period. Like in the beginning, it's like just everything is a yes. And then you get past that initial period and it's like, okay, not everything flows smoothly. And we need to kind of figure things out here. And tell me if you relate to this, but I find that during that messy middle period of whatever it is, my impulse is to self-isolate and not talk about it because it feels great to talk to people about, when things are all tied up in a neat little bow, or I'm in a flush of excitement. It's a honeymoon period. But when it's that messy middle after the honeymoon period, there can be this impulse, I find anyway, to say, you know what, I'm just going to go into a cave and figure this out by myself. And then when I have everything neatly figured out and the relationship is like thriving and everything's working now, or the business has really like taken its form and it's the messaging is clear and it's all figured out and I'm flush with clients, or the creative project is finished and it's ready to be shown to the world in all its glory. That's when I'll step back out of my cave and reconnect with people. And it's a very human impulse. It's, if this is something you relate to, you're not alone. I share this impulse. And in my opinion, it's really a mistake, because when we self-isolate during the messy middle, it's so much harder to figure things out on our own. It's so much harder to keep our morale up on our own. And it is like we need the alchemy of human connection in order to move our way through the messy middle and keep going. So I want to tell a story that I think for me has become an allegory, even though it's a true story, but it's become an allegory for this whole messy middle thing and the different ways that we can approach it and the different outcomes that those different approaches can lead to. So again, for those of you who've been following this podcast for a while or who've known me for a long time, part of this story you will have heard me tell before, and then I'm going to add a new part to it. So before I became a therapist and a coach, I worked in reality TV for 10 years as an editor. And at the beginning of my career in film and TV, I edited a few small independent films as well, but I did editing for 10 years. And at the beginning of that career, I initially entered that field wanting to be an independent film director. That was my goal. And I started off in that direction by making a documentary, a very, very scrappy, homemade documentary called Subway Dreams, about New York City subway musicians. If you're curious, you can find it, believe it or not, on Amazon. But I made this documentary and, of course, the making of the film was a whole messy middle process unto itself. I completed that process, and then there was a whole next process of promoting the film, getting others to see it. And part of that was I put on a screening of it in a little theater in my hometown in New York City. I sent out this big press release because I had previously been working at a magazine and I had all these press contacts. So I just sent a press blast out to promote the screening. And through that, I got some amazing press, and I was featured in Time Out New York magazine and on Brian Lehrer, an NPR radio host, had me on his like local live TV show here. And most exciting to me, David Lee Roth, who had a live radio show at the time, had me as a guest on his radio show, which was wild, totally surreal, and very exciting. And then dovetailing with all that, I was also submitting the film to festivals. And that's, that's a process that for most filmmakers, like you've got to send it out to many, many festivals before it gets in. Usually it's just, like it's a numbers game and you've got to really just go for it. After the screening that I put on, I Googled my name and the name of the film and found all this, cool publicity that I had garnered. And in addition to that, I found this one personal blog post on a very, just someone's obscure personal blog that was just a scathing takedown of the film, of me, of, this person, for whatever reason, was very pissed that I had made this film, thought that I was a dilettante for having made this film, whatever, who knows? I could go into all kinds of speculation about what was going on for them. But the point for this story is that I was so like freaked out by that negative review. And without having any of the nervous system understanding and tools that I have today, I just dealt with it by not dealing with it in a very unconscious way. And looking back, what I would say happened is I went into a state of nervous system freeze and I stopped promoting the film and I stopped sending it to festivals. I had sent it to a few and got rejections, which is par for the course. But I didn't continue. A few people said to me like, "Well, why don't you send it to some more festivals. Maybe there's some feedback that you can take and like rework the edit, reposition it a little bit." There was another Subway musician documentary that by pure coincidence had come out the same year as mine and was also being submitted to festivals. And so, there was some folks who were saying like, maybe you need to just create like a very distinct angle for your film, re-edit it, repackage it, yada, yada, yada. I felt like I tried and it didn't work and now I'm done. And that was that. And I did get to screen the film at several places in the city, and the musicians who were in the film did attend those screenings. And I mean, that was very cool and rewarding. But I absolutely could have pushed things further and didn't, because I basically didn't know how to navigate the discomfort of the messy middle of that process. That messy middle felt unclear, confusing, uncomfortable. I took that negative criticism very personally and didn't, do the things I would have needed to do to kind of come back home to myself after feeling so upset by reading those words. And so instead of continuing to navigate that messy middle and see, where that road would take me, I abandoned that particular road and, went on to do other projects in the future. But that pattern tended to show up over and over again in the independent projects that I would do. That when the messy middle would rear its head, I would basically not have a lot of bandwidth for navigating that part of the process, and would retreat from it before things had really taken their course. Now, here is the part of the story I have not told before on this podcast. So around that time, or it was a little bit after I had already put that documentary promotion to bed and I had moved on and I was working in television, editing reality shows. I met another editor who I became really close friends with, and she, both of us were freelance editors, and so we worked on a show together, and then we went off and worked on lots of different projects, and we stayed close friends. And she wound up working on somebody else's documentary. I'm going to call the director of this documentary Charlie, just for the sake of having a name. That's not his real name. But my close friend was working as an editor on Charlie's documentary, and she kept telling me as she was working on it, like, this documentary is a piece of shit. It's like not going anywhere. It could go somewhere, but the director doesn't have the right vision, and it's just like not working. And he's like a nightmare to work with, and whatever. It was kind of like a gossip subject that we would talk about. But eventually her work on that project came to an end, and he had, I think, had submitted it to a bunch of festivals and it didn't get in anywhere. And we were chuckling about it because, she said it just wasn't a great project or he didn't have great vision. And then, but she kind of kept tabs on what was happening with that film. And then another editor came on to work on it and they did a whole round of, reshaping it, and it got sent to festivals again. And again, it didn't get in anywhere. And I think that the director went through this cycle 2 or 3 times, but did not abandon the film or himself. Whatever my friend thought of him or the project, he stuck with it. He stuck with the project. He stuck with himself through that messy middle. And by, I think it was the third round, like the third year in a row of applying to film festivals, having reshaped it again, he got the film into the Tribeca Film Festival, which, if you're not in that world, it's a very prestigious film festival. The film was subsequently picked up by a TV network. It aired on TV. It had a whole life, and that director went on to get funded to do subsequent TV documentary projects after that, and continued to have a career as a film director, which is that's what I had wanted to do. I had wanted to have a career as a film director. And I made a big first step in that direction, and then retreated once the messy middle reared its head. And I didn't know how to ride the waves of the discomforts of that process. So seeing this other person who, regardless of how my friend viewed him, seeing how he started off with something that maybe looked like a mess and maybe, it was rejected here, there, and everywhere else, but he stuck with it and stuck with himself and somehow found his way through that messy middle and kept going. And how our different approaches to the messy middle had these very different results in the end. So years later, I had a different type of life experience. This messy middle thing can be mapped on really to any type of growth journey, I think. So I'll share another story that is another allegory for this messy middle. And it's a story about how I did navigate the messy middle and experienced different results because of doing that. So years later, the story I'll share is not about another film project, but about a relationship, my relationship with my husband, who I've been with for 10 years now. And prior to meeting him, my experience with relationships had followed a very similar pattern, actually, to my experience with creative projects, where I'd meet someone and there'd be this, typically initial honeymoon period. Then things would hit some kind of bump, which every relationship does. No relationship is completely smooth sailing straight from the get-go. And when things got uncomfortable, instead of finding the way through it with the other person, I would just wait until things blew up and then I'd walk away. Or I would find some way to blow things up myself and then, we'd both walk away. And, I believe this was because I had not found my person yet. For whatever whole variety of reasons, I wasn't ready yet. It was luck. It was all kinds of things. And also, I hadn't yet developed the tools to stay with the messy middle. When I met the person who is now my husband, Paul, we initially had a very, very highly energized honeymoon period. I mean, this was not a slow burn. This was love at first sight. It was very exciting. It was just different from anything I'd ever experienced before in relationships. And I knew this was different. I knew this was my person and I knew I was ready. And after our initial honeymoon period, we hit some pretty serious bumps. And we had a very rocky and high conflict period of our relationship that started fairly early on. Like there was the honeymoon period, like that lasted a few months, and then we hit some pretty serious bumps in the road and had a very rocky, I'd say, year and a half of just very rocky waters that were very, very difficult and highly uncomfortable to navigate. But this time, there was something different. And I moved through the discomfort and we moved through it together to get to the other side, not to the land of perfection, because that we all know it does not exist, but to the land of like a healthy, functioning, imperfectly beautiful relationship that, you know, continues to grow and evolve because it's alive and thriving. And we have a lot of fun together and we still fight and, we're like real people. So there are still bumps in the road, but we know how to get through them together now. And looking back, I can look back at that messy middle time but that we had in our relationship and I can say that there were certain things that helped us get through it. I think, first and foremost, there was just that certainty that we both felt that we were each other's person. There was that initial honeymoon connection was strong enough that it motivated us to move through that like highly uncomfortable period together. And there were things we availed ourselves of that helped us to move through it. And these are things that really can apply to anything that you might be working through. So in our relationship, we did make use pretty early on, actually, of help. We sought out therapists and coaches to help us through. Some were more helpful than others, but regardless, we did not attempt to figure this out in isolation. We got help and support. We brought other people, other supportive people into our world with this. We did our best to take care of ourselves in between, you know, disagreements or difficult, encounters. We would take time apart to take time with ourselves, to reconnect with ourselves, to breathe through it, to give our nervous system an opportunity to reset. We allowed it to be painful and messy. It just was. It just was painful and messy. Like really, really, truly messy. And that's the thing about the messy middle. It's not just a theory or an idea or a phase. It's a place where things can unravel and past coping behaviors that we've been using to move things along are no longer working to continue moving things along. And so with my husband and I, there came a point where that happened. Things unspooled and it changed everything for me, actually, because there was this turning point. And in allowing it to be messy, the crux of my own conflict pattern was unlocked in the opposite way to how I thought it was going to be unlocked, because my whole life I had navigated relationships by trying to create harmony through suppressing my own anger. And I thought that that was the way to make things work in a relationship. But what had been shown to me to be true throughout all of my previous adult relationships was that that is actually not the way to move things forward in a sustainable and healthy way. It's really the way that to lead things into ultimately combusting and falling apart. And now in my relationship with the person who would become my husband, up until we reached this critical point, I had been following that same pattern of suppressing my anger or trying to keep it under wraps because that was all I knew, and it was in my wiring. But at a certain point, there came a moment where I had been trying to create peace through de-escalation, through apologizing, and it just hadn't been working because this cycle of anger between the two of us just kept bubbling up and rearing its head, and leading to combustive fights over and over and over again until finally there was this one particular moment when the dam inside of me just burst and I unleashed my anger in its most raw form. And my husband and I were having a conversation in the middle of the street in public. And I had this completely like out of body experience where I confronted him about something that I had been trying to suppress, that had been bubbling up in me, and just I could no longer contain it. And I don't even remember this because I was so out of my mind, but he tells me that I was holding this plastic bag with a kebab in it, like this snack that I wanted to eat later. And I basically just started like flailing the bag with the kebab around and hitting him with it. Not something I'm terribly proud of. Like I said, it was just like this kind of animalistic energy came over me. I had the kebab in one hand, and then I had this umbrella I was holding in the other hand, and I threw the umbrella to the ground. I probably threw the kebab too. I don't even know what happened to that. And I just took off running up the street like a wild animal. I stopped at a street corner and I was looking for a taxi cab to take me home because we weren't living together yet at this point. I lived in Brooklyn, he lived in Queens. And as I was waiting for the cab, I was caught in this pivotal point of not knowing whether I wanted to go or if I wanted to stay because I loved him so much, but I just couldn't contain my feelings inside anymore, specifically my anger. And as I waited for a cab to pass by, my husband walked up to me. He had followed me. He had come after me, even though I had showed him what I thought was my absolute ugliest possible side, my anger. And yet there he was, still wanting to connect with me, still wanting to be with me. And it just disarmed me so much. And as I remember it, I just wept. I just the tears just melted and spilled down my face because I couldn't believe that another person would still love me after I had displayed this part of me that I thought was so ugly and unacceptable. And we turned toward each other, we hugged each other, and that's when I knew that I could be with him for the rest of my life because he could hold me even in my anger. That was a moment that changed everything about how I love, how I show up in relationship. And it was the moment when I learned that real peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict or feelings. It comes from being loved and loving each other through the conflict and through the feelings. And I think that's really at the heart of the messy middle. It's the part where everything that we've relied on, the masks and the patterns and the polished versions of ourselves stop working. And we're faced with this choice either to retreat and perform peace or perfection again, or to let the truth move through us and see what happens when we're held in it and find a way to be with ourselves through it, not to abandon ourselves when things get messy. So maybe your version of this isn't a kebab fight in the street. Maybe it's a hard conversation with a client or a launch that just totally flops, or a creative idea that isn't landing the way you hoped it would. But the emotional dynamics are analogous, that raw, exposed moment when everything in you wants to run away. That's the moment when the messy middle is actually doing its job. It's loosening the old pattern, that pattern of conditional self-acceptance that has been keeping you stuck. And it's giving you a chance to build trust in yourself and in the people who can hold you when you're not, quote, at your best. So in the case of my husband and I, we kept going because we both had a vision, even through that period of darkness and messiness. We had a vision of what we knew it could be. We both had a vision of what we had seen when we first met each other and first formed a connection. And we knew that this version of our relationship was possible. We had tasted it and we knew that it was possible. We just didn't necessarily know how or how long it would take us to get there, but we had this vision that we both felt grounded in. And finally, I think what really helped us move through that difficult period was that ultimately both of us, and I'm actually getting emotional as I'm about to say this, both of us cared more about the connection than about saving face. Sure, we both had our moments then and, continue to now at times where we both really want to be right. We're human beings. But ultimately, we cared more about nurturing the connection that we had started building together than we cared about saving face or being right or, winning or looking perfect on the outside. And here's what I want to share with you. As you're listening to this, you may be relating it to something that you are experiencing or working through right now. Maybe it is the messy middle of a creative project that you really care about, and it's gotten into a period of time that feels difficult to weather. Maybe you are relating it to a business that you are wanting to launch or that you are wanting to grow from where it already is, or that you're wanting to pivot into a new direction. Maybe you are relating it to a relationship that you've begun or that you're entering a new stage of. You might be in any number of different kind of life experiences where you're going through a messy middle. And here are the words of encouragement that I want to share with you. First of all, the messy middle is not a mistake. Think about child development. The messy middles of every stage of development are an inherent part of the process. The fact that things don't look neatly tied up in a bow right now does not mean that the stage you're in is a mistake. It is a necessary and vital stage of any process. The process, it's like, it's a bridge period. And there's no way to get from here to there without the bridge. And you're building the bridge as you go. So it's normal. People don't talk about it a lot. That doesn't mean it's not happening. It's very much an inherent stage of every process of growth, of moving into a new iteration of yourself, of your creative work, of your business, of your relationship, of your life. The second thing is get support. Get support. The messy middle is no joke. It is uncomfortable as hell. It can rock you. It will rock you. Don't try to go through it alone. There's no reason to go through it alone. It is so much more difficult to go through it alone. Get support. I would encourage you to get a coach, which is what I do as when I'm going through any process that has a messy middle. But if that's not something that you're in a position to do, buddy up with a friend. Find someone else who's also going through a messy middle that's in some way similar to yours, and be each other's buddies. Have a buddy to go through it with. The third encouragement is to take breaks. Pace yourself. It's that old cliche, this is a marathon, not a race. You cannot predict the time arc of the messy middle. Take breaks, pace yourself. What that does is that it actually allows you to keep going, to sustain and keep going instead of totally burning out, hitting a wall and, torching the whole thing and walking away. If you want to be able to keep going, take breaks, recharge, pace yourself. And next, have a vision. Have a vision of what you're walking toward and marinate in the deliciousness of that vision, while at the same time making sure to take care of yourself and find pleasure in the here and now. You want to have a vision that you're marinating in and just, looking toward. You also don't want to be delaying pleasure until you reach your goal, because that will put so much pressure on things that you won't actually want to keep going anymore. Take pleasure in the now. And finally, when you find yourself twisted up in fear about losing face or not having it all together or just being in the messy middle, bring your attention back to the connection that you are building with your clients, with your audience, with your relationship person, with your community, with yourself. Bring your attention back to connection. And if any of this hit home for you in some way, I'd love to hear about it. Please reach out. Send me an email, anna@annaholtzman.com. Tell me what you connected with. Share with me what you're navigating right now in your own messy middle. And if you would like support, reach out. I work with people one-on-one as well as in a group setting, and I'd love to have a conversation with you and see how I might support you in navigating the messy middle so that you do keep going. It's worth it. It's so, so worth it. Thank you so much for staying with me through the beginning, messy middle, and conclusion of this podcast episode. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I'm sending so much warmth and encouragement. And until next time, take good care. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do me a favor. Hit that follow button so you don't miss a thing, and leave a rating or review. It helps more people find this show, and honestly, it makes my day. And if you're looking for more ways to trust yourself and start listening to that gut instinct of yours, come hang out with me on Instagram at Anna_Holtzman. Let's keep the conversation going. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, trust yourself. You've got this.